The old stories say that winter can arrive like a visitor who does not knock. It settles over the land, over the roofs, over the paths between trees, and it stays longer than expected. In the Old Norse telling, that kind of winter has a name, and after it comes a story of wolves, sea, fire, stars, and a world that is almost gone. It is a quiet story in some ways, even when it speaks of great endings, because it remembers that after the coldest night, there is still a dawn somewhere far away. So let us walk slowly into that tale as if we are crossing a field at dusk with the last light still resting on the grass. Let the air feel cold but not painful. Let the sky feel wide. Let the old names come softly, one by one, as though they were stones found in a pocket long ago. Before Ragnarok itself, there is a long patience in the world. The gods live in Asgard, high and bright, yet not untouched by worry. Odin watches with one eye, as the stories say, and his wisdom has the weight of old roads and difficult knowledge. Thor carries his hammer, and with it the sound of thunder, the sound of iron meeting storm. Freyja knows beauty, loss, and the quiet price of love. Loki, who is clever and shifting and never entirely still, moves through the stories like smoke through a half-open door. Even before the final winter, the gods already live in a world that has shadows in it. The Old Norse world is not built like a soft dream. It is made of branches, roots, stone, sea, sky, and fire, all held together in a great and trembling shape called Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots go deep. Its branches spread far. In the imagination of the old storytellers, it carries many worlds at once, like a great ash tree holding birds, wind, and weather in its limbs. Under it, near its roots, things stir that are ancient and patient. Not everything in the universe is meant to be comfortable. Some things simply are. And so, when the signs of ending begin, they do not arrive all at once. They gather. There is a long cold called Fimbulwinter, a winter of winters. It is said to come before Ragnarok, and in the old telling it lasts for 3 seasons without a summer in between. 3 winters, one after another, with snow where there should have been green, and wind where there should have been birdsong. It is a story detail that feels almost like weather remembering itself. The cold becomes a kind of measure. Time feels slower when the world is held in frost. Fires burn low. People and gods alike understand that something is changing, though perhaps they cannot name it yet. There is something hauntingly familiar about a great winter. It is not only about temperature. It is about waiting, about doors staying shut longer than usual, about the soft hush that comes when snow covers even the familiar stones. In old myths, winter often feels like a threshold, a place where one world can almost touch another. Fimbulwinter is like that, only larger, older, and more final. It is not just one snowstorm. It is a long pause in the breathing of the world. The old poets and storytellers, the skalds, did not write these tales as if they were neat little puzzles. They layered them like cloth folded many times. They used images that could be carried in the mind. Wolves, ravens, cold seas, cracked earth, the smell of ash, a ship made from the nails of the dead, drifting toward a fate that feels already written into the grain of the wood. Their stories were not meant to sound distant. They were meant to be remembered by voice, around fires, in halls where the smoke moved slowly up into the dark rafters. And that is one of the quiet wonders of mythology. A story can live for centuries by being spoken. It can pass from one mouth to another, changing a little, yet remaining itself. A tale about the end of the world can still feel warm in the telling, because the people telling it are still alive, still listening, still trying to understand the shape of things. In the Norse tales, there are many signs that the order of the world is loosening. The wolf Fenrir, bound for a long time, waits. He is not merely a beast, but a force of rupture, a hunger that has been held back. The serpent Jörmungandr lies in the sea and circles the world, so large that it is said to encircle the earth, and hold its own tale in the deep. Loki, too, moves toward his own fate, and the boundaries between loyalty and betrayal grow thin. Across the heavens and the waters, old agreements begin to fail. It is worth pausing on Fenrir, because he is one of the most unforgettable figures in these stories. A wolf in myth is never only a wolf. It can be the cold edge of nature, the fear that lives outside the firelight, the strength that cannot be reasoned with. Fenrir is tied down with a magical ribbon, after the gods learn that no ordinary chain can hold him. Even then, the binding is not simple. The story includes cleverness, sacrifice, and distrust. It is one of those old myths that feels like a warning about how difficult it is to contain something once it has been feared for too long. The binding itself becomes a quiet kind of promise that one day it will break. The old stories often carry this feeling that what is delayed is not the same as what is solved. A door closed does not mean the storm has gone away. It may only mean it is waiting on the other side. And so the final days approach. The gods know more than mortals, or at least they sense the shape of coming things more clearly. Odin is always gathering knowledge, even when knowledge is heavy. He gave one eye for wisdom in the famous telling, and that sacrifice suits the whole tone of the myths. Nothing comes free. Nothing is gained without losing something else. Even beauty has a price. Even fate has a cost. Ragnarok itself is often translated in a few different ways, and that is part of its old richness. It can be understood as the fate of the gods, or the twilight of the powers, or the breaking of the divine order. It is not just destruction in the simple sense. It is an unmaking, and then, later, a remaking. The word feels like a door closing very slowly, and then opening again to another season of the same house, changed but not empty. Some versions of the story say that first there is a deep moral drifting, a loosening of bonds between kin, a fading of trust. Brothers turn on brothers. Old promises become lighter. These are not only mythic events. They are also human events, familiar in quieter forms. Stories often use the scale of the cosmos to describe the softness of social decay. A world can end not only in fire, but in the small erosion of care. The gods prepare, though perhaps prepare is too orderly a word. They gather allies. They stand at the edges of battle. They remember their ancient enemies. Heimdall watches from his high post, alert and silent, his hearing so keen that nothing can stay hidden from him for long. He is like a boundary made alive, a sentinel between what is and what comes after. In some stories, he and Loki are destined to meet and destroy one another. The idea has the stern calm of a winter mountain. There is no rush in it, only certainty. And then there is the great ship Naglfar, made from the nails of the dead in the old telling. It is a strange and eerie image, but also a practical one in mythic terms. Death is not abstract here. It has materials. It has driftwood and bone and the remains of ordinary lives. The ship waits, as many things wait in these myths. Waiting is one of the oldest movements in the world. Snow waits for the thaw. Seeds wait in the dark soil. Ancient names wait in manuscripts and memory. Naglfar waits for the final gathering. The sea is always important in Norse mythology. It is not a decorative background. It is a force, a road, a barrier, and a grave. The people of the North knew water as a route to trade, travel, and danger. In their myths, the ocean is alive with creatures and meaning. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, lives there like a secret moving beneath the surface. The sea is the place where land ends and mystery begins. It is easy to understand why a culture shaped by coastlines and winter winds would imagine the final battle rising partly out of the waves. When the end comes, the sky itself begins to break in signs. The sun darkens. The moon is swallowed. The stars seem to vanish. In some tellings, the heavens are disturbed in ways that feel both cosmic and intimate, as if the old ceiling of the world has developed cracks. The imagery is not clinical or distant. It feels like standing outside at night and realizing that the familiar pattern of constellations is no longer where it should be. The sense of direction slips. Even the stars, those patient keepers of the dark, become uncertain. There is a kind of beauty in mythic disaster, though it is a quiet beauty, not a joyful one. The beauty lies in scale, in the way the old mind tries to picture change too large to hold. When a civilization fears the end, it makes an image of it. When it hopes for renewal, it makes an image of that too. Ragnarok is both fear and hope. It is the shape of endings imagined by people who knew winter, war, and survival. It is not a soft ending, but it is not an empty one either. In the great battle, the gods meet their enemies. Odin faces Fenrir. Thor faces Jörmungandr. Freya, in some versions, faces the fiery giant Surtur without the sword that might have saved him. Tyr confronts the hound Garmr. Heimdall and Loki destroy each other. These are not just names, they are patterns. Each meeting seems to echo some old tension in the world, some opposition that had been present all along. Thor and Jörmungandr deserve a slow moment because their struggle feels almost like a rhythm in the mythic sea. Thunder against serpent, hammer against poison, storm against depth. Thor is a god of strength, but not only strength. He is also a protector, a traveler, a noisy presence on the road between places. Jörmungandr, by contrast, is stillness with pressure behind it, the vast curve of what surrounds and threatens. Their battle is a meeting of surfaces and depths. In one famous version, Thor kills the serpent, takes 9 steps, and then falls from its venom. The number 9 itself feels important in Norse myth, as if the world enjoys circles of completion. 9 nights, 9 worlds, 9 steps, 9 branches of meaning. The old storytellers loved numbers that felt rounded and full. Odin's fate is perhaps the most solemn. He seeks wisdom all through the myths, but knowledge does not grant immunity. Fenrir opens his jaws wide, and the sky seems to hold its breath. It is one of those mythic moments that feels ancient even if heard for the first time. The wolf is not merely a villain. Odin is not merely a victim. Both are woven into the same fate, one that has been approaching since the first binding was tied. The stories do not ask us to cheer. They ask us to witness. And then the fire begins. Surtur, the fire giant, comes from Muspelheim, the realm of flame. In the old cosmology, fire is as primordial as ice. Creation itself begins in a meeting of heat and cold, of melting and forming, and Ragnarok returns one of those original powers to the forefront. Surtur's fire is not a campfire, not a hearth, not a warm and useful flame. It is the kind of fire that changes landscapes. It is the brightness that strips away the old shape of things. It is strange, perhaps, that fire can be both home and ending. A hearth fire comforts. A wildfire transforms. The myths know this duality very well. They are never simplistic about elements. Ice can preserve. Fire can purify or destroy. Sea can carry life or swallow it. Wind can cool a brow or tear a roof away. The Old Norse imagination is full of these layered truths, which may be part of why the stories still feel alive. As the battle unfolds, the world itself suffers. The earth sinks into the sea. The sky falls or seems to. Flames reach across land and water. Yet even here in the wreckage, there is a kind of order. The old stories are not random. They have a pattern of fall and return. That pattern is gentle in its own stern way. It suggests that nothing, not even the world, is only one thing forever. After the fire, there is silence. This silence matters. In many stories, the ending is loud. In Ragnarok, the noise is only part of it. What follows is the quiet that comes after a storm has moved beyond the valley. The air is different. The horizon is cleaner. The ash settles. The old world is gone, but not all life is gone with it. Some gods survive. Among them are Balder and Herther in certain versions, returning from the underworld or appearing after the catastrophe. Vidar and Vali also live through the ending in some tellings. Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, inherit his hammer, Mjolnir, which is a detail that feels almost like a bedtime promise hidden inside a storm story. The tool survives the wielder. The strength passes on. The world does not remain empty. There's also the story of Lif and Lifthrasir, a pair of humans who survive by sheltering in the wood of a place called Hodmamis Holt in some versions, living through the catastrophe and emerging when the world is renewed. Their names themselves feel soft and hopeful, linked to life and resilience. They suggest that after the Great Burning and the Great Flood, there is still a human continuation. Not the same world, not the same sky, but life still. This is one of the most comforting things about Ragnarok, if one can call such a story comforting. It is not comfort in the ordinary sense. It does not deny loss. It does not pretend the old world can be restored exactly. Instead, it says that after the end comes something else, and that something else can still hold memory. The children of the old gods survive. The earth rises again from the sea. Green things return. Fields can be sown. The sun has a daughter who continues the shining path in some versions, and the renewed world is quieter, fresher, and less burdened. There is something almost botanical about this ending. Not a triumphant castle rising from rubble, but a field after fire where seeds begin again. The Norse imagination, for all its severity, understood regeneration. Forests grow back. Seasons return. Even the long winter is eventually followed by light. The stories do not promise that nothing will be lost. They promise only that loss is not the last shape reality can take. The surviving gods gather in a place called Idaval, and there they speak of what happened. This detail is very human. After a disaster, people often gather not to explain everything, but to sit together and remember. The new world begins with conversation. A meadow appears where a battlefield had been. That is a gentle image and a good one to rest with. Meadows have a way of making the mind slow down. They are open, forgiving spaces. The old gods in the new world are like survivors who have found a hill with enough grass to sit down. And somewhere in the background of these myths is always the oldest question, the one that underlies many cultures, end-of-the-world stories. What remains when order is broken? In Norse myth, what remains is not nothing. There is continuity without sameness. There is memory without perfection. There are a few gods, a few humans, a new sun, and a new earth. The world is remade from what survived the fire and flood. It is not a tidy restoration. It is more like an old vessel repaired with newer wood, still useful, still carrying water. The surviving world is described in some ways as more beautiful than before, although beauty in myth often means simplicity and brightness rather than luxury. The fields are green. Streams run. Unharvested grain may grow without a hand to sow it. A hall called Gimle stands with a brightness that outlasts the smoke. There is a sense that the world has been washed clean, though not forgotten. It has lost its old burden and its old certainty, and in that loss it becomes new. This is perhaps the most interesting thing about Ragnarok as a bedtime story. It begins in winter and ends with renewal, but not a simple one. It does not move in a straight line. It circles like the world serpent itself. It includes death, but it also includes return. It makes room for the strange fact that civilizations often imagine both collapse and restoration at once. A myth can be dark and hopeful in the same breath. It can say, with complete seriousness, that everything will end and also that some form of life will continue. The old Scandinavian world that gave rise to these tales knew hardship intimately. Winters were long. Travel could be dangerous. Sea journeys demanded courage. Communities depended on one another. In that context, myths about final battles and renewed worlds may have offered not only entertainment, but a larger way of thinking about endurance. They helped people imagine that even if an era fails, another may begin. Even if the gods themselves are not forever, the pattern of life is larger than one generation. That may be one reason the tale still lingers. It does not reduce fear. It gives fear a shape. A shape can be carried. A story can be told. What is shapeless is often harder to bear. So the myths put names to the wolves, names to the fire, names to the cold. And by naming, they make the vastness more human. There are many small details in the broader Norse mythic world that make Ragnarok feel rooted, not floating. The gods hold feasts. They travel in disguise. They trade insults, gifts, and wisdom. The cosmic tree is imagined with roots and branches like a living map. Crows fly. Boars are sacred. Ships matter. Mountains matter. The dead matter. The names of places matter. It is a world that feels assembled from weather and labor and memory. Even the final battle has the atmosphere of a gathering, a grim one perhaps, but still a gathering. The old world does not end in emptiness. It ends in contact, in the meeting of known powers. This gives the myth a solemn dignity. No one escapes the pattern. Even the gods must face it. And yet, if we stay with the story long enough, we see that it is not only about punishment or doom. It is also about restoration of balance. Surtur's flame burns away the old corruption. The sea returns what it took. Earth rises. Life reappears. There is no suggestion that the new world is identical to the old. That would be too simple. Instead, the myth honors transformation. The past is not erased. It is absorbed into what comes next. This is a useful kind of wisdom for a sleepy evening. So many things in life feel final when they are really changing. A long winter may feel endless, but spring can still come. A story can feel like it is closing, but then another chapter quietly opens. A room can seem dark until the lamp is turned on. The old myths understand this in their own dramatic and patient way. They teach through image rather than instruction. If you imagine the renewed earth after Ragnarok, you may picture not a grand empire, but a hush of clean air after rain. Maybe the grass is still wet. Maybe stones are warm from the sun. Maybe the hall of the survivors has smoke rising gently from its roof. Maybe the first conversations in the new age are simple ones. What happened? Who remains? What should be planted? Where should we begin? There is comfort in beginning again with ordinary things: water, bread, shelter, names, fire. In the aftermath of cosmic ruin, the old stories return to these basics. That is a kind of mercy. The surviving son, in some traditions, is not the old son restored, but a new one, or the old son's daughter taking her place. This detail is lovely in a quiet way. It means light is continuous, but it is also handed on. Day follows day, and even the heavens have their own kind of inheritance. The moon may be gone or changed, and yet the sky remains a place of cycles. The world does not stop being a world simply because one age has ended. It is also interesting that the old Norse myths often feel comfortable with the fact that knowledge is incomplete. The stories are preserved in fragments, poems, prose retellings, and later manuscripts. Much of what we know comes from works written down in Christian Iceland after the older pagan traditions had already changed. So Ragnarok itself arrives to us through layers of memory. It is an ancient story filtered through later hands, like light seen through old glass. Some details differ by source. Some names shift. Some events are clearer in one telling and hazier in another. That fragmentary quality suits the myth. Ragnarok is about the breaking of continuity, and our knowledge of it is also partial. We do not possess the original voice of every skald, but we have echoes. Echoes are enough for a bedtime story. In fact, echoes are often better than full brightness. They invite the mind to wander gently. The medieval texts that preserve these myths, such as the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, are themselves old landscapes of words. They are not modern textbooks. They feel more like storerooms, hallways, and carved beams in a long hall where the past has left its marks. Reading them is sometimes like stepping into a room where many feet have passed before. The language can be spare, but it carries weight. One sentence may hold a whole weather system. The skaldic tradition loved kennings, those poetic turns of phrase that describe one thing through another. A ship might be called a sea steed. The sea might be a whale road. Gold might be fire of the hand. This style suits mythology beautifully because it asks the listener to think softly around the object rather than stare directly at it. The mind moves around the image like a lantern moving along a wall. That indirectness gives the stories space. Ragnarok, too, is a kind of kenning in spirit. It is not merely the end. It is fate in motion, twilight of the powers, a darkening, then a relighting. The phrase itself feels like it belongs to a half-lit horizon where the last birds are returning to the trees. If one sits quietly with this myth, one may notice how many of its forces are old and elemental. Fire, ice, sea, wolf, tree, blood, ash, these are not decorative symbols. They are the substance of the world. The Norse imagination was close to matter, close to weather, close to survival. The gods are magnificent, but they are also vulnerable. That vulnerability makes them strangely human. They can be wounded by the same large forces that shape mortals. In some sense, the myth says that even power has limits, and limits in stories are often where the deepest sympathy begins. Perhaps that is why the tale remains comforting for a quiet night. It acknowledges that there are endings we cannot avoid. It allows grief its place, but it also leaves a small door open, not to undo the past, but to continue beyond it. The world after Ragnarok is not perfect, but it is alive. The sea still shines. The grass still grows. The children of the old gods still speak. The survivors still remember. There is a kind of tenderness in remembrance. To remember an ending is to admit that something mattered. The old Norse stories do not forget the cold, the fire, or the wolves, but neither do they forget the meadow after the storm. Both belong to the same great pattern. And so, if we continue to wander through this myth gently, we can imagine the long winter drawing over the earth, the silence deepening, the fire arriving, and then the astonishing hush that follows. We can imagine the world not as broken beyond repair, but as changed by time, like wood darkened by age and polished by many hands. We can imagine the old gods standing in the new light, not triumphant exactly, but present. Presence is sometimes enough. There's also an old and lingering melancholy in the story of Ragnarok that feels very human. The gods know their fate and still they act. They cannot stop the coming winter, but they do not vanish into fear. They stand. They watch. They meet what must be met. That is not only mythic courage. It is a way of being with uncertainty, a way of saying that dignity can remain even when outcomes are fixed. And in the quiet of a bedtime hour, that is a gentle thought. The North, after all, has always had a special relationship with light. Long summer days can last almost endlessly, while winter darkness can feel equally persistent. The balance of seasons there has shaped imagination in profound ways. A culture that knows a sun that barely leaves the sky in one season and seems to disappear in another will naturally create stories of return. Ragnarok belongs to that pattern of looking toward darkness and still believing in the possibility of dawn. If you listen closely to the myth, you may hear not only the end of the world, but the rhythm of the year, the long darkness, the waiting, the breaking of ice, the first green shoots, the warmth that does not stay forever but arrives all the same. The story becomes seasonal and the seasons become sacred. The gods in their great hall are not so far from us in this respect. We also live by cycles, sleep and waking, work and rest, loss and recovery. Even a long night is not endless, though it may feel that way from inside it. A bedtime story about Ragnarok can hold that truth quietly, without needing to say it directly. There are many myths of endings in the world, and many of them offer a cycle, a renewal, or a hidden continuation. Humans seem to need that. A final door, if left completely final, can feel unbearable. So stories sometimes leave a candle lit in the next room. Ragnarok does this beautifully. After the flame, there is field. After the sinking sea, there is land. After the silence, there is speech. The names themselves soften when repeated slowly. Odin, Thor, Freyja, Loki, Balder, Heimdall, Fenrir, Jörmungandr, Surtur. They sound like pieces of a long and old instrument. Each name carries a weather of its own. And in a long story, names matter almost as much as events because they are the handles by which memory lifts them. If you are drifting towards sleep while hearing this, you might let the images pass by gently. A world tree standing in cold air. A wolf waiting in the shadow of a chain. A serpent moving in the black sea. A hammer flashing briefly in the storm. A fire giant crossing a burning plain. Then, after all of that, a meadow, a new sun, a handful of survivors speaking quietly among the grass. It is enough to imagine them. The mind does not need to hold every detail tightly. It can simply rest near the story, as one might rest near a window in winter, feeling the warmth from inside and watching snow move across the dark outside. The Old Norse world also reminds us that myths preserve values as much as events. Courage, loyalty, wisdom, sacrifice, hospitality, the willingness to face the inevitable, the understanding that one may not win in the ordinary sense and yet still act nobly. These are not loud lessons. They are slow ones. They settle in over time. Odin's hunger for wisdom is one of the clearest examples. He hangs from the tree, he gives an eye, he seeks signs, he listens to the dead, he learns from sacrifice, he is never static. He is always moving toward the hidden edge of things. In the end, that wisdom does not save him from destiny, but it gives his life a shape worth remembering. The myth suggests that insight matters even when it does not alter the ending. Perhaps especially then. The same can be said for memory itself. To remember the old world after it has fallen is a kind of survival. The new world needs witnesses. Idaval, with its rebuilding and its speech, is a place of witnesses. A place where the story can continue, not as a denial of loss, but as a recognition that loss has been seen. And so the tale softens again. The hard edges of battle give way to fields, halls, and light. The story does not rush. It lingers on what remains. In that lingering, there is peace. Perhaps a listener, half asleep, could imagine walking across the new earth very slowly. The grass is cool. The sky is clear. The old violence is behind the horizon. There are still names to learn, still stones to place, still bread to break. The world is not innocent, but it is renewed. That is a subtler promise and sometimes a truer one. In the end, Ragnarok is not only a myth of destruction. It is a myth of transition. The world passes through fire and then through quiet. It is an old story about endings that make room for beginnings. It honors the sorrow of what is lost, and it does not hurry past the ashes. But it also keeps faith with the possibility that life returns differently, and that this difference is not failure. It is the shape of time. So let the winter drift by. Let the wolves sleep in their dark places. Let the sea keep its old murmurs. Let the stars remain where they are or vanish and return in their own time. Let the old gods stand in the field of the new world, speaking softly, as if not to wake the grass. Let the story rest there for a while, and if your thoughts begin to loosen, that is all right. The tale does not mind. It will continue without insistence, like snow falling outside a window, like fire holding its warmth in a quiet room, like an ancient name remembered just clearly enough to feel real. There is still the hall, still the meadow, still the new sun rising over a world that has learned, in its own old way, how to begin again. And in that gentle beginning, the story of Ragnarok settles, not as an alarm, but as a hush, a long hush, a thoughtful hush. A hush in which the earth, once broken, slowly remembers how to breathe. The quiet after Ragnarok is not empty. It is full in a gentler way, like a room after candles have gone out, when the warmth is still present in the walls and the last scent of smoke lingers softly in the air. The old stories often return to this feeling, because ancient people understood that endings do not always arrive with noise. Sometimes they come as a lowering of the light. Sometimes they come as silence after shouting. Sometimes they come as the slow, patient rearrangement of what remains. That is perhaps one reason the Norse myths continue to feel close, even now. They do not pretend that the world is safe forever. They do not promise that storms will never come. They do not insist that wisdom protects every life from loss. Instead, they look directly at change. They sit with it. They give it names. They shape it into wolves, serpents, ash trees, winter, and fire. In doing so, they make the unknown feel a little less like a void, and a little more like a story the mind can approach without fear. Long before these myths were written down, they lived in voice. They passed from one person to another, perhaps beside hearth fires in the dark northern months, perhaps during long travels, perhaps in halls where snow pressed against the walls and the wind sounded almost like distant speech. The old Scandinavian world was a place of hard weather and wide distances, but also of careful memory. People in such places often became attentive to detail. They noticed the shape of clouds, the pattern of ice, the movement of birds across water, the quality of wood in a beam, the sound of a footstep on frozen ground. A mythology born in such a world would naturally be alive to small things as well as great ones. Ragnarok, then, is not only the end of gods. It is also a great gathering of images drawn from ordinary observation and stretched into cosmic scale. The wolf is a predator, but also the fear of being pursued. The serpent is a creature of rivers and seas, but also a symbol of hidden danger beneath calm surfaces. Fire is a hearth's friend and also a destroyer. Winter both preserves and withers. The myths seem to understand that the natural world itself contains opposites, and that life is always balancing among them. There is a particular stillness in that understanding. It resembles the stillness of deep water. The surface may be moving, but below it there is a slow steadiness. In the stories, the gods know that they are mortal in their own way. Even Odin, who gathers wisdom from so many places, cannot gather enough to escape fate. Perhaps that is what makes him so haunting. He is not a remote perfection. He is a figure of striving. He listens. He bargains. He sacrifices. He seeks runes, words, secrets, omens. He is the god of knowledge, and yet knowledge remains partial. That partialness is very human. It may be one of the reasons he feels so memorable. And there is something else in Odin's character that belongs to the mood of bedtime stories. He is often moving through the world disguised, or uncertain, or in search of what cannot be seen at first glance. He is not satisfied with the surface. He wants the hidden layer beneath it. In the quiet of a room at night, that kind of curiosity can feel familiar. One thinks of all the things that are not visible in daylight thinking alone. The long histories under a city street. The sealed chambers in old tombs. The vanished languages still waiting on stone. The way an old name can preserve a forgotten meaning long after the people who first spoke it are gone. The Norse imagination was rich with such hidden layers. Even the landscapes of the myths feel layered. Asgard is not simply a place in the sky. Jotunheim is not merely a land of giants. Midgard is not only the human world, but a world guarded, enclosed, and connected to others by bridges, trees, and sea paths. The cosmos is arranged like a woven cloth. Every realm touches another in some fashion. The structure itself suggests that nothing is entirely isolated. The gods are near to the giant lands, and the giants are near to the boundaries of order. Humanity lives in between, protected but not removed from the larger tensions. This woven quality gives the myths their gentle depth. One can imagine a listener slowly following those threads, not with urgency, but with wonder. There is something restful about a well-made pattern. The mind enjoys returning to it. It recognizes certain shapes again and again, like waves approaching the shore. A giant from the cold outer lands, a god with a difficult choice, a weapon forged with careful skill, a prophecy that cannot be escaped, a crossing, a loss, a renewal. The pattern repeats, and each repetition is a little different. Sometimes the myths appear to be telling us that order itself is temporary. The gods build, but what they build can be broken. They defend, but what they defend can still be lost. They know this, and yet they continue. There is grace in that continuation. It resembles the quiet courage of people in all ages who have planted, built, taught, tended, copied, sung, and repaired despite knowing that none of it lasts forever. Ancient history is full of such acts. A clay tablet pressed with careful signs, a wall painted with images no one will see for centuries, a burial object placed beside a body in hope or memory, a poem recited and forgotten, then later rediscovered in fragments. The Norse myths belong to this same long human habit of making meaning in the face of time. And time in the story of Ragnarok is almost like a character of its own. It does not hurry. It does not argue. It simply approaches. Seasons turn, prophecies mature, bonds weaken and tighten. The days grow colder. The sea changes under moonlight. A chain is forged. A hall is built. A tree stands. A root reaches downward. These are ordinary things, but in the myth they become part of a larger unfolding. Time is felt not as numbers, but as weather and aging and expectation. That may be why the end of the world in Norse thought feels so different from some other apocalyptic stories. It is not an abstract judgment dropped from above. It is not merely punishment. It is part of the universe's own movement. The old world contains within itself the seeds of its ending. The gods do not stand outside this condition. They share it. They are part of nature's larger rhythm, however divine they may be. There is something almost restful in that, because it suggests that change is not an exception. It is the way things are. The image of the world after Ragnarok, with green rising again from the sea, has a softness that is easy to overlook. It is not a dramatic restoration of everything as it was. It is not a return to the same arrangement. It is a quieter world, perhaps, and a humbler one. The surviving gods and people do not seem to come back as rulers of absolute certainty. They come back as witnesses to continuation. That is a very old and very human hope. Not the hope that pain never existed, but the hope that after pain, life can still be present. In many ancient traditions, the earth is imagined as a living body that can be wounded and healed. Mountains are bones, rivers are veins, the sea is breath. The Norse myths, though fierce in their imagery, also seem to think this way. The world tree itself is a kind of living structure, at once cosmic and organic. It is not a machine. It grows, it supports, it suffers, it connects. A tree can be damaged and still stand. It can hold birds, rain, insects, and memory in its branches. To imagine the cosmos as a tree is to imagine existence as something rooted and reaching at once. It begins in darkness below and opens toward light above. That image alone could keep a listener company for a long time. A tree in winter, bare branches against a pale sky, roots deep in hidden ground, birds resting in the cold. Snow collecting in forks of wood. In old stories, trees often hold knowledge because they are patient. They outlast us. They observe without speaking. They are rooted in one place and yet travel through seasons endlessly. Perhaps this is why Yggdrasil feels so alive as a symbol. It carries both vulnerability and endurance. It does not escape suffering. It contains it. The same is true of many of the figures who move through the Ragnarok cycle. Freya, Balder, Thor, Odin, Loki, Heimdall, Fenrir, Jormungandr, Hel, the fire giants, the dead who stir, the survivors who remain. Each is linked to a role, a force, a fate. They are not merely individuals, but pressures in the fabric of the world, and yet they still feel personal. Thor's hammer, for instance, is not only a weapon. It is a sign of protection, a familiar thunder in the distance, a presence that reassures even while it strikes. He is often remembered as one of the most approachable gods in the Norse pantheon, perhaps because he is direct, physical, and recognizable. Thunder is like that. You do not need to explain it to know that it matters. There is an old intimacy in thunder across cultures. In many mythologies, the sky-sounding power belongs to a defender, a king, or a divine fighter. People everywhere watched storms with respect. A storm could nourish crops or crush them. It could bring rain, lightning, and fear in the same hour. In northern lands especially, where the seasons were severe, such forces would feel both practical and sacred. One can imagine the sound of Thor traveling through a saga not merely as a special effect, but as a pattern of reassurance. The storm comes and there is something mighty enough to answer it, but even Thor's strength cannot prevent the larger unwinding. That too is important. The myths honor strength without pretending it is enough. They honor wisdom without promising control. They honor fidelity without erasing grief. It is a balanced kind of tragedy, not despairing exactly, more like clear-eyed. And in that clarity, a kind of peace can arise. If one follows the Old Norse sources carefully, there is always a sense that the stories survived because they were useful in more than one way. They entertained, of course. They explained. They linked families and kings to ancestral figures. They gave shape to the unknown. They also carried social memory, perhaps even fragments of older Indo-European story patterns shared across distant regions. Myths are often like that. They travel farther than people do. They change slowly and keep a trace of many hands. A single tale may carry echoes from the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Age of Settlement, the Age of Kings. It is a little like a river that has crossed many lands and remains itself while carrying every sediment in its flow. Ragnarok has such a river quality. It has a beginning in prophecy, a middle in conflict, and an afterworld of quiet renewal, but it also contains older currents. One can sense the older fear of winter, the older memory of the sun's return, the older knowledge that death and rebirth are woven together in agricultural life. For communities living close to the rhythms of grazing, planting, fishing, and storing, the world would have felt cyclic in daily ways even while individual lives ended irrevocably. Thus, the myth can be read on many levels at once. It is cosmic, it is seasonal, it is moral, it is emotional, it is social. It is, in a way, a map of how to continue when certainty is gone. That map is not drawn with straight lines. It bends. It circles back. It includes crossings over water and descents into the underworld. It includes warnings ignored and wisdom learned too late. It includes dark forests, cold halls, and the sound of something large moving unseen. But it also includes companionship. Many Norse stories care deeply about bonds between kin, sworn comrades, hosts and guests, and those who share a hall against the dark outside. In a hard climate, such bonds would have mattered greatly. Hospitality was not merely politeness. It was survival, trust, and reputation combined. A hall was a shelter, but also a social world. To be received into it was to be recognized. That social world remains present even in the end of the gods. The survivors gather. They speak. They remember. They inherit a world that has been changed, but not emptied of relationship. This may be one of the most soothing elements in the whole myth. Even after the Great Breaking, there is still community. There is still speech. There is still a place to stand together. Speech, in fact, is one of the deepest themes in the Norse material. Runes are carved, names are spoken, oaths are sworn, songs preserve memory. The Cirrus in Verlispa speaks across time, describing what was and what will be. In a pre-literate world or partly literate one, the act of speaking was itself a vessel of continuity. A remembered poem could cross generations. A formula could preserve law. A name could hold a lineage. The voice could do what stone could not. It could move. And yet stone also matters. The carved runestone, standing in a field or by a road, is a quiet object of endurance. Many such stones still remain in Scandinavia, weathered and softened by rain, carrying names of the dead and brief declarations of relationship, grief, and pride. They are not loud monuments. They are small, stubborn, and humane. They show that the old world cared about being remembered, but often in a restrained way. The memory is not theatrical. It is inscribed. It is there for the passerby who pauses long enough to read. This restrained remembrance feels very close to the mood of Ragnarok after the flames. The story does not shout at the reader to celebrate. It merely points to what persists: a green shoot, a surviving name, a hall of the living. The mind can rest there. If one wanders a little farther through Norse myth, one finds other stories that surround Ragnarok like mist around a hill. The death of Balder, for instance, carries its own deep sadness. It is one of the most poignant tales in the tradition, and it seems almost to foreshadow the larger destruction to come. Balder is beloved. He is bright. His death feels like the loss of a summer light. The grief that follows is vast and strangely quiet. Everyone knows something has gone wrong in the order of things, but the shape of the wrongness is hard to repair. In some ways, the sorrow of Balder prepares the emotional ground for Ragnarok. It teaches the listener that the world can be wounded even before it breaks. Loki's role in these stories is equally fascinating, though difficult to settle into one definition. He is a trickster, a boundary crosser, a helper, a destroyer, a maker of problems, and sometimes the source of solutions. Such figures are common in mythology because they embody instability. They reveal that order is never complete. They also remind us that intelligence can be mischievous, and that mischief can be dangerous. In the long arc of the cosmos, Loki becomes one of the forces that carries the story toward its final crisis. But even then, he remains complicated rather than simple. Myth rarely permits a clean division between good and evil. It prefers entanglement. That too is a kind of truth. And in the quiet hours, entanglement may feel more real than certainty. Human lives are entangled with weather, memory, family, place, and chance. Ancient people knew this intimately. Their gods and monsters often reflect that understanding. A hero may be brave and still fail. A trickster may be amusing and still terrible. A mother may grieve in a world that offers no answer. A king may rule and still fear the end. All of this is familiar to anyone who has watched the seasons turn and realized that everything living is also temporary. There is a profound tenderness in accepting temporariness without becoming harsh. The Norse myths at their best do that. They stare down death, but they do not become cold. They show violence, but they do not deny beauty. They place gold and ash in the same hand. They let a shining hall stand beside a wolf's mouth. They let prophecy be spoken in the same breath as snowfall. This balance can feel almost musical. One note rises, another falls, and together they make a line that is haunting rather than triumphant. It may be helpful when thinking of Ragnarok to picture not only battle but landscape. A plain stretched wide, mist moving low, a distant ridge, the crack of ice, the smell of wet earth after thaw. A river widening under spring melt. The Norse imagination is never far from environment. Gods and giants do not float above the world in abstraction. They move through terrain, they cross bridges, they stand on fields, they ride, they wait. They are embodied in weather and place. This makes the myth feel grounded, almost tactile. It is never only about ideas. It is about how ideas feel when they arrive as cold, wind, fire, and stone. The ancient northern world itself was built on close observation of such realities. Before modern clocks and maps, people read time from light and shadow, from star paths, from river freeze, from livestock behavior, from sea conditions, from the length of the day. These everyday attentions are quiet forms of knowledge. They ask for patience. They reward memory. They turn the world into something partly readable. The myths likely grew from minds trained in that reading. A wolf is not just a wolf. It is the shape of pursuit. A bridge is not just a bridge. It is connection with risk. A final battle is not only a battle. It is the moment when all the visible signs of the world's strain come together. And yet, after all of that, the surviving world is not a blank slate. It is a continuation with memory. That is perhaps the gentlest and most meaningful part of the story. The new world does not deny the old one. It arises from it. The past is not erased. It becomes foundation, however painful. This resembles the way ruins still support later cities, or the way older words remain inside modern language, their meanings partly forgotten but still present. So much of history is like this. A civilization falls, and then another uses the same roads, the same stones, the same river crossings. What seemed final becomes material for something else. In that sense, Ragnarok belongs to a very broad human pattern. Many cultures imagine an ending that is also a renewal. Sometimes this renewal is moral, sometimes agricultural, sometimes spiritual. The forms differ, but the emotional contour is similar. People want to know that the world can survive loss. They want to know that after the great unmaking there may still be a field, a seed, a story. The Norse version is notable for its restraint. It does not gild the disaster. It lets disaster be disaster. Then it lets the field appear. A field is a modest miracle. It is open, level, and available to growth. It requires labor. It requires weather. It requires time. It is not a palace or a temple. It is simply ground made ready. That is a beautiful image for the end of a cosmic tale. Not a throne, not a triumph, but a place where life can begin again if it wishes. Perhaps the mind can rest in that simplicity. There is a kind of wisdom in the old myths that may be especially comforting at night. They do not demand that everything be resolved before sleep comes. They allow uncertainty to remain. They allow the sea to keep some of its secrets. They allow the dead to stay partly distant. They allow the future to be only partially visible. This is a humane generosity. It recognizes that no one can hold the whole cosmos in the hands. The best we can do is listen carefully, remember a little, and live well within the limits given to us. In many ways, that is the lesson quietly shining through Ragnarok. Not that endings are easy, but that they are part of the shape of existence. Not that suffering is good, but that meaning can survive it. Not that knowledge conquers fate, but that seeking knowledge is worthwhile. Not that the world is guaranteed, but that the world can return in forms we did not expect. It is a myth of sober hope. Sober hope is a subtle thing. It does not flare, it glows. It can live beside grief without trying to outshout it. The surviving gods of the New World standing on Idaval feel like figures of that kind of hope. They are not naive. They have seen the fire. They have seen the wolf and the serpent and the dark waters. And still they stand in the grass, speaking. Their speech is enough to begin again. One might imagine, after the old conflagration, a long silence over the earth. The kind of silence that follows snowfall on a still night, then a bird call, then wind in new leaves, then the faint sound of water finding its path through stone, then footsteps. The world after ending would likely not be loud. It would be attentive. Everything alive would be listening. That kind of listening is not far from prayer, though it need not have a name. The myths themselves may have been shaped by this listening. To the sea, to the forest, to the voices of ancestors, to the inner life of fear and hope, to the sound of one season ending and another beginning. The people who preserved them understood that the world speaks in layers. Some of those layers are easy to hear. Some are buried deeper. A good story allows both. It lets us hear a thunderclap and also the faint root growth under the soil. Even now, centuries later, these stories continue because they retain that layered quality. They are not exhausted by one interpretation. They can be read as religion, literature, ritual memory, cultural inheritance, poetic cosmology, and human psychology all at once. They can be approached from a distance or held close. They can entertain the waking mind and soothe the drowsy one. They have a texture that makes them feel old and still living. Perhaps that is the best way to think of Ragnarok as bedtime company. Not as a warning and not as a puzzle needing immediate solution, but as a great old rhythm. The world begins. The world struggles. The world breaks. The world softens. The world begins again. In that rhythm, one can place one's own life as lightly as possible. A day begins. A day grows full. A day fades. Sleep comes. Morning returns. The pattern is smaller, but it is related. Grand myth and the human life mirror each other in quiet ways. So let the last images remain simple. A tree with deep roots. A wolf at the edge of sight. A hall in the cold. A bright hammer in a storm. A field after fire. New grass. Quiet voices. The memory of what was lost, not erased, only held gently in the background, the world breathing again. And now, as the old story settles even more deeply into silence, it may be enough to imagine the new earth just as the dawn touches it, not rushed. Not brilliant all at once, slowly, a pale light over water, a hint of warmth along the horizon, birds beginning in the distance, the grass lifting itself in the first mild air. The survivors looking around as if to learn the shape of morning once more. This is where the myth rests and where the listener may rest too. In the calm after the fire. In the meadow after the storm. In the long, gentle space where memory and renewal sit together without struggle. The old world has passed. The new world is here. And for now, that is enough. Even after the first clear ending of the tale, there is still more to linger over, because myths like this do not truly stop at a final line. They keep moving softly in the mind, like a tide that has already turned but still remembers the moon. Ragnarok, perhaps more than many other old stories, invites this kind of quiet reflection. It is not only a story of destruction. It is also a story of sequence, of cycles, of the way ancient people understood time not as a straight road, but as something nearer to a circle, or a spiral, or a repeated turning of sky and season. That way of thinking about time can be found in many old civilizations. In Mesopotamia, the rising and falling of kingdoms seem to echo the rise and fall of the river floods. In Egypt, the daily journey of the sun across the sky and the annual return of the Nile gave a steady pattern to the imagination. In the Old Norse world, the long winters and brief bright summers could make time feel like a living contest between endurance and change. The myth of Ragnarok belongs to that older sense of time, where the end is not always a blank wall. Sometimes it is a door. Sometimes it is a clearing. Sometimes it is the moment when a great wheel turns over and continues. The word itself has a kind of weight to it. Ragnarok can be understood as the fate of the gods or the twilight of the powers, depending on how it is read and translated. Even the uncertainty of that translation feels fitting. Ancient words often carry more than one shade of meaning, and sometimes the exact shade is lost to history. That loss is not always a weakness. It can make the old story feel more spacious, as if it contains chambers we can no longer fully enter, only glimpse by lantern light. The surviving manuscripts preserve fragments, but fragments can be haunting in their own gentle way. They ask us to imagine the rest. The poems that tell of Ragnarok were preserved in medieval Iceland, in manuscripts copied centuries after the older oral traditions had already been circulating. That long journey from spoken memory to written page is one of the quiet miracles of cultural history. It means that people sat by firelight, listened, repeated, adjusted, remembered, and passed on what they knew. Then later scribes wrote the verses down, keeping alive voices from an age even older than their own. There is something tender in that chain of preservation. It is a reminder that history often survives not through grand preservation plans, but through ordinary acts of attention. Some of the strongest images in the story may have deep roots in lived experience. A long winter could feel like a little end of the world. A volcanic eruption, which the North Atlantic landscape has known in abundance, could darken the sky and cover the land in ash. Earthquakes could split ground and loosen stone. Tidal changes and storms could make the sea seem unpredictable and immense. A culture living close to such forces might naturally imagine cosmic upheaval in terms of fire, flood, cold, and shattering. Myth, in that sense, is not an escape from nature. It is a way of listening to nature so closely that it begins to speak in symbolic language. And there is another layer, quieter still. Ragnarok is not only about the cosmos and weather. It is also about the human feeling that all things, even glorious things, are temporary. Forts fall. Summer ends. Loved ones disappear. Ships rot. Feasts conclude. Songs are remembered only in part. This knowledge, though melancholy, can become a form of wisdom. The Old Norse world did not, at least in these myths, promise that the strong would live forever or that justice would arrive with perfect neatness. Instead, it offered a harsher but perhaps steadier truth. Courage matters precisely because things are fragile. Loyalty matters precisely because it can be broken. A moment of beauty matters more, not less, because it will pass. That thought has a kind of dust-colored dignity to it. There is no need to force cheerfulness into it. The myth is not cheerful, and it does not ask to be made so. It simply allows loss to be named without denying the possibility of renewal. That balance can feel strangely comforting late at night, when the world has grown quieter and the mind is no longer required to keep pace with the day. In that quieter space, one can sense how old stories sometimes carry truths too large for ordinary speech. They do not solve sorrow. They give sorrow a shape. The figures gathered around Ragnarok are memorable partly because they each carry a distinct kind of fate. Odin, seeking wisdom, knowing that even wisdom has limits. Thor, mighty and direct, meeting the serpent in a contest that feels both heroic and tragic. Freya, generous and life-giving, yet destined to face a foe without the weapon that might have saved him. Loki, elusive and shifting, a force of trouble and transformation whose role resists simple classification. Heimdall, watchful at the threshold, sounding the horn that signals the end of the old order. Each one seems to embody not only a character, but a principle of existence. Insight, strength, fertility, disruption, vigilance. In a sense, the world itself is assembled from such qualities. The giant wolf Fenrir is especially striking because he seems at once monstrous and inevitable. In the myth, fear of him leads to restraint, and restraint leads to anger, and anger leads to the very catastrophe that was feared. This pattern, where attempts to prevent disaster help create it, is one the human mind recognizes almost instinctively. It appears in history, in politics, in family life, in the handling of power. A thing treated only as a threat may eventually become one. A bond made with suspicion may weaken under the weight of suspicion itself. The old stories often understand this before any formal philosophy does. They watch human behavior and translate it into wolf and chain and broken trust. There is also the serpent, Jörmungandr, encircling the world. Such a figure belongs to a very old and widespread symbolic family. World serpents, cosmic snakes, boundary creatures, and dragons appear in many traditions. They can mark the edge of order, the depth beneath consciousness, the horizon around the world, or the danger that waits at the perimeter of the known. In some stories, the serpent is a guard. In others, a threat. In others still, both. The Norse serpent surrounding the world gives the cosmos a sense of enclosure, as if reality itself has a border that can be crossed only at the most dangerous moment. Its stirring at Ragnarok feels like the sea itself rising in memory. The fire of Surt is equally old in feeling, if not in precise origin. Fire ends things, but it also reveals them. It strips away surfaces. It leaves behind ash and hidden mineral color. In a world where wood, thatch, and oil lamps were essential to daily life, fire could be home, craft, warmth, and danger all at once. A fire giant at the end of the world is not just a fantastic image. It is a magnification of one of the oldest elemental experiences. Fire cooks food, hardens metal, warms the room, and also consumes the roof. It is a companion that cannot be trusted too much. No wonder ancient storytellers gave it a face. The strange beauty of Ragnarok lies in the fact that it does not end with annihilation alone. After the immense loss, some things remain. Some things return. The world reemerges from the waters. The fields are green again. The surviving gods walk the renewed earth. A pair of humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, are said to emerge from hiding and continue the human story. Whether one reads this literally or symbolically, the image is quietly powerful. Life persists in sheltered places, not always in great halls or on battlefields, but in the hidden grove, the hollow log, the patient refuge. Many species survive harsh seasons that way. Many histories do too. The notion of survival through concealment has a particularly ancient feel. Archaeology often reveals continuity in places where catastrophe might have seemed total. Settlements are abandoned and then resettled. Traditions vanish for a while and then reappear in altered form. Pottery styles change slowly. Burial customs evolve. Languages shift but retain echoes. A ruined site may still preserve foundations beneath later layers. Human history is full of such recoveries. The old earth never quite stops keeping records, even when the writing is broken and the ink long dried. There is a quiet interest in how this myth would have been heard by a medieval audience, and perhaps by earlier listeners before the poems were written down. They were not, after all, distant tourists to an abstract legend. They lived in a world where memory, honor, feasting, kinship, and obligation were immediate realities. To hear the gods themselves subject to fate may have offered a stern kind of companionship. No one, not even the highest, stands outside time. The hall is warm, but it is not eternal. The ship is strong, but it may still sink. The sword shines, but it will dull. This is a difficult lesson, yet also a clarifying one. It removes illusions and leaves behind something harder, and perhaps truer. That truth may be why the myth continues to speak across centuries and cultures. Modern readers may no longer share the religious framework of the Old Norse world, but they often recognize the emotional architecture at once. They know the feeling of standing in a system they cannot control. They know that institutions, forests, climates, and bodies all have their own timing. They know that one can prepare and still be surprised, can love and still lose, can resist and still fail. Ragnarok makes room for all of that without apology. It says, in effect, that fear is rational, but fear is not the end of meaning. If one listens very gently, the myth also suggests something about attention itself. Heimdall, the Watcher, has hearing so keen that even the grass grows noiselessly beneath him. That image of near-perfect attention feels like an emblem for the whole tradition. The old stories require close listening. They reward patience. They do not reveal themselves in a single glance. One must return to them. Their meaning changes with age, with grief, with knowledge. A child may hear adventure. An adult may hear mortality. An elder may hear memory. All of these are present, and none excludes the others. That multiplicity is part of why mythology survives so long. It speaks in symbols, and symbols are durable because they remain useful in changing times. A dragon can mean greed, chaos, treasure, or the raw power of nature. A tree can mean lineage, world structure, or shelter. A sea can mean exile, travel, danger, or the unknown. In Ragnarok, fire, frost, wolf, serpent, and ash all cooperate in a symbolic language that needs no translation to be felt. Even when the exact cultural background changes, the emotional weather remains understandable. The tale continues to breathe because the symbols are rooted in human life. There is something especially restful about considering the afterworld of the myth as a meadow rather than a palace. Idaval, where the survivors gather, is usually imagined as a green plain. That detail matters. After the great struggle, the new order is not immediately ornate. It is open. It is spacious. It has grass underfoot and sky overhead. The field itself becomes a kind of sanctuary. Perhaps this is why so many sacred landscapes in world mythology are gardens, groves, islands, or enclosed fields. After complexity and conflict, open green space feels like mercy. It is the sort of place where one can finally breathe. The Old Norse imagination seems to have appreciated that kind of mercy, even while remaining fully aware of hardship. The same world that imagined warrior halls and bloodied battlefields also imagined bright halls of hospitality, feasting, and remembrance. There is warmth in that, not a softening of reality, but a recognition that hardship is not the only truth. Community exists too. Food exists. Story exists. Drink shared among companions, the keeping of oaths, the singing of verse, the tending of a fire through winter. These are modest things, but they are among the oldest forms of civilization. Long before marble temples or written law codes, there was the table, the hearth, the circle of voices. And perhaps that is one reason the story of Ragnarok can feel oddly intimate. It is cosmic in scale, but it is built from human-scale experiences. A final battle is like the final argument that changes a family forever. A divine death is like the end of an era, the passing of one world order into another. A renewed earth is like a morning after a long illness, when the body feels weak but alive. We understand large events through smaller ones because our minds are patterned that way. Myth does not ask us to become bigger than ourselves. It asks us to recognize ourselves in the shape of the universe. In the background of these stories, the North Atlantic landscape itself seems to stand quietly. The volcanic islands, the fjords, the glaciers, the black sand beaches, the moss, the cold air, the long twilight, the bright summer nights that can make sleep feel like a kind of negotiation. Such landscapes can sharpen one's sense of the world as both beautiful and severe. One learns that beauty need not be gentle. A cliff at sunset can be breathtaking and dangerous. A glacier can glow blue and still be lethal. The sea can look like polished metal and then become a destroyer. The myths seem to reflect that same double quality. They are luminous, but they are not soft in the modern sense of soft. Yet for bedtime, as for winter evenings long ago, their very severity can become comforting in a strange and indirect way. To hear of universal struggle is to be reminded that one's own troubles are part of a much older human weather. Not diminished, exactly, but situated. A sleepless hour, a difficult season, a private fear. These are real and they matter, but they do not stand alone. They belong to a greater pattern of change. The old storytellers knew that the mind often rests more easily when it can place its own sorrows within a wider frame. The night feels less endless when it is part of a cycle. The endurance of these tales also reminds us how historical memory itself works. We often imagine that the past is fixed, but in truth it is continually reassembled from traces. A poem survives in a manuscript. A manuscript survives in a library. A library survives through fire, flood, and care. Then scholars compare versions, interpret phrases, reconstruct meanings, and propose possibilities. The result is not perfect certainty, but a living conversation with the dead. Ragnarok, like so much of Norse mythology, exists in that conversation. It is preserved not as a complete photograph, but as a mosaic, with missing tiles and differently colored repairs. And yet the image remains recognizable. There is a tenderness in that incompleteness. Humans are not very good at preserving everything, but we are sometimes very good at preserving enough. Enough to remember the shape of the tale. Enough to feel the contour of old belief. Enough to understand that people once stood under the same stars and asked what would happen when all things were tested. The answer they gave was not simple comfort. It was a story with loss at its center. But the story also insisted that loss did not have the last word. That insistence, modest as it is, may be one of the oldest forms of courage. Courage in the myth is often quiet. It is not always triumphant. Odin does not defeat fate. Thor does not simply overpower destiny. Freya does not restore what is lost. Even the gods are bound by the old structure of ending, and still they move toward what must be faced. This is one of the most moving features of the story. It honors action even in the presence of inevitability. The task is not to guarantee success. The task is to meet what comes with steadiness. That is a kind of heroism available to ordinary life as well. One cannot command the future, but one can choose how to stand within it. The myth also leaves space for the natural world to continue beyond human and divine drama. Earth, sea, sky, and the stars do not exist merely as a stage. They are participants in the turning of the ages. The sun, often personified in old traditions, moves whether or not humans watch. The moon cycles through its phases. The tides come and go. Trees leaf, flower, and drop their leaves. In a mythology shaped by close attention to the land and sky, these patterns become evidence of cosmic order, even when that order includes destruction. The world is not random. It is changing according to laws larger than any single being. Some of the surviving details of Norse myth feel especially calm when separated from their dramatic contexts. A hall of the dead, a bridge over water, a horn sounded at the edge of time, a deep ash tree supporting worlds. These images are not merely exciting. They are architectural. They suggest structure. Even at the end, there is form. Even in chaos, there are thresholds. Ancient myth often gives shape to the invisible by making it walkable, speakable, inhabitable. The underworld has paths. The heavens have branches. The future has gates. The mind can rest a little when the unknown has a shape. That may be why bedtime is such a fitting setting for these stories. As sleep approaches, the ordinary world begins to loosen its outlines. The room darkens, distances flatten, sounds become sparse, thoughts drift. In that in-between state, a myth of endings and renewals can feel almost perfectly matched to the body's own nightly surrender. Each evening is a smaller Ragnarok, not in any literal sense of catastrophe, but in the sense of release. The day's noise falls away. The conscious mind gives up its bright claims. Something old and watchful remains, but it is quieter now. Then morning, if it comes, will be another beginning. To think of nightly rest in this way is not to make grand claims about sleep. It is simply to notice the resemblance. Human life is full of these small rehearsals of change. We let go and recover. We lose track and find our way. We speak and fall silent. We wake and sleep. The Norse myth turns this pattern into a cosmic drama, and by doing so, it helps us feel the dignity of the ordinary cycle. A simple evening may not feel epic, but it participates in the same deep rhythm of ending and return. The new world after Ragnarok is sometimes described in a way that suggests reconciliation, though not perfect resolution. A few gods remain. A few humans endure. The old pain has not been erased, but it has not annihilated the future. That is an unusually mature form of hope. It does not deny what has happened. It does not pretend that memory can be washed clean. Instead, it makes a place for continuation inside brokenness. Such a hope can be difficult to recognize because it is not shiny. It is practical. It is almost humble. It says, the field may be scarred, but it can still grow. The heart may be marked, but it can still love. The story may be damaged, but it can still be told. And stories, in the end, are one of the quietest kinds of survival. A story can outlast a hall, a ship, a dynasty, a winter. It can be half remembered and still alive. It can be translated, adapted, retold, and still carry a recognizable pulse. The Old Norse tales have crossed centuries in this way. They have passed from skald to scribe, from library to classroom, from scholar to reader, from reader to listener. They have changed shape, as all living things do, yet they remain themselves enough to be found again. That is a kind of resurrection, though not the dramatic sort, a more literary one, a patient one. So if the mind is still awake, it may be calm to imagine the surviving gods walking the green plain in a light that is not harsh. Perhaps they speak of what they saw. Perhaps they do not speak at all. Perhaps they simply stand with the new grass around their feet, looking at the world as if it were precious because it had nearly been lost. The sky above them would not need to announce itself. The wind would be enough. The water would be enough. The birds returning from nowhere and everywhere would be enough. And in that gentle expanse, the old tale can fade not with a bang, but with a breath. The wolf is gone. The serpent is still. The fire has settled into the earth. The ash has cooled. The roots of the great tree hold. Somewhere a seed opens. Somewhere a stream finds its course again. Somewhere human hands begin the small work of living in a world that has been remade. Let that be the last image for a while. A quiet field after the long dark. The first growth of a new season. The memory of thunder, far away now, like weather remembered from childhood. The old world has passed into story, and the story itself has grown soft around the edges, ready to rest beside you. There is no need to hold it tightly. It can remain where it is in the gentle dark, while sleep gathers slowly and the renewed earth waits, patient and green, for morning. Yet even after that imagined morning, the Old Norse mind would not have rushed to explain everything. It had room for uncertainty. In that, it feels strangely close to the modern world, which also lives among unanswered questions. We still look at the sky and wonder about its beginning. We still trace the strange paths of stars and ask how the universe came to be arranged in such a way that it can notice itself. We still stand at the edge of forests, oceans, and deep time and feel how much remains hidden. The myths do not solve this. They do something softer. They give shape to the feeling of standing before mystery. Long before the sagas were written down, long before scholars compared versions and reconstructed old beliefs from scattered hints, these stories were carried by voices. That may be one of the most beautiful facts about them. They lived in sound before they lived in ink. They were told beside fires in long winters when the wind pressed at the walls and the sea was not far away. A story like Ragnarok would have been heard in rooms lit by flickering flame, where the faces of listeners came and went in shadow. Perhaps the room smelled of wool, smoke, wood, salt, and animal hide. Perhaps someone paused to listen more closely when the names of the gods were spoken. Perhaps children, half awake, heard only fragments and carried them into their dreams. and dreams themselves seem to belong to the same old country as myth. The ancient peoples of the North did not think of the mind as a perfectly sealed place. A dream could arrive as message, warning, memory, or omen. It could feel like a visitation. Even now in modern life, dreams still carry that particular slipperiness, where the everyday and the impossible sit side by side without alarm. We wake and try to gather them, but they thin out quickly, like mist over water. The Norse stories, with their giants, gods, wolves, and serpents, move with a similar logic. They are not concerned with proving themselves in the way a ledger or a map would. They are concerned with presence. It may help to remember that the world of Norse mythology was shaped by real geography. Cold seas, short summers, long nights, mountain passes, volcanic stone, and weather that can turn suddenly all leave their mark on imagination. A people who live close to the sea often come to know its moods with deep seriousness. A people who face winter year after year learn that life is not guaranteed by comfort. In such a setting, even the idea of a cosmic winter, a fierce and final season, feels less abstract than it might elsewhere. Ragnarok is not just destruction from nowhere. It has a climate. It has a texture. It arrives like a storm that belongs to the world that made it. At the same time, the myth should not be reduced too neatly to environment. Human imagination is more than weather translated into symbols. The Norse people were also traders, travelers, poets, farmers, shipbuilders, and settlers. Their world connected them with distant shores and other traditions. Ideas moved with people. A tale could travel more lightly than a ship, and more lastingly than a winter road. This is one reason mythological stories are so fascinating to study. They are both local and wide-reaching. They grow from a particular soil, and then they spread in ways that are difficult to trace exactly. Their origins are old enough to be partly invisible, which only makes them more intriguing. There are even now many small uncertainties around the myths. Scholars can compare texts and reconstruct patterns, but there are still gaps. Some details were never written down. Some were altered by the hands that preserved them. Some may have been forgotten long before the first manuscript. This is not a weakness of the story so much as part of its nature. Very old things rarely arrive to us intact. They come in pieces, like pottery from a buried city, or like inscriptions weathered by centuries of rain. We do not complain that the ruin is incomplete. We stand before it quietly and imagine the shape of what once was. The Norse myths also remind us that endings do not always feel final to those who live through them. A person inside a historical change rarely knows whether they are at the end of one world or the beginning of another. They simply continue through the weather of the day. A hall burns, a kingdom shifts, a language changes, a coastline erodes, and life goes on in altered form. Civilizations do not usually disappear in a single dramatic instant. They fray, adapt, merge, and transform. The same is true in the mythic imagination. Ragnarok is sudden in image, but it belongs to a longer pattern of strain. The bonds of the world have been loosening all along. There is something tender in that idea, though it sounds severe. A bond that can loosen must once have held. A world that can break must once have had coherence. The myth honors both realities. It does not pretend that order is natural and effortless. It understands that order is maintained, and that maintenance takes effort, faith, and often sacrifice. That may be why the gods of Asgard are so compelling. They are not smooth and distant ideals. They are active beings within a tense cosmos. They plan, warn, fail, resist, negotiate, and endure. They are powerful, but not omnipotent. They belong to the drama, not above it. One can almost imagine the rhythm of the old tales settling into the mind like slow rainfall. Odin the Seeker, always gathering wisdom at a cost. Thor, forceful and direct, meeting danger with the simplest kind of answer. Loki, restless and difficult to contain, forever shifting the mood of the story. The giants, older than respectability and often older than order itself, pressing against the edges of the gods' world. The deep animal presences, too, the wolf and the serpent and the raven, each carrying meanings that are not quite reducible to words. Ravens especially seem to belong to the border between thought and omen. They are observant. They move between earth and sky. In many cultures, they appear as messengers, companions, or witnesses to fate. And fate, in the Norse imagination, is neither neat nor comforting, but it is profound. The Norns, those elusive figures associated with destiny, suggest a world where time is woven rather than merely measured. A woven thing can be cut, frayed, knotted, and mended, but it cannot be understood by a simple line. This gives myth a very old elegance. It treats existence as layered. The past remains present. The future already casts a shadow. What has been done continues to matter. A decision made in one generation may echo into many. In this sense, Ragnarok is not a detached finale. It is the visible flowering of every earlier thread. It is worth lingering, too, on the image of the great tree that holds the worlds. World trees appear in many traditions, which is itself a quiet wonder. Different cultures, separated by oceans and mountains, have often imagined some vast living axis connecting realms above and below. Perhaps this reflects a deep human intuition that life is not flat. Perhaps it comes from the experience of standing beside a tree and sensing in it a miniature cosmos. Roots in darkness, trunk in the middle world, branches in the light. The Norse tree is especially moving because it is both cosmic and vulnerable. It is not an abstract diagram. It can suffer. It can tremble. It is part of the drama, and yet it continues. The image of a tree binding worlds is restful in a certain way, perhaps because it suggests steadiness in the midst of change. Roots do not hurry. They work in darkness, almost invisibly. That is true of many things that sustain life. Soil is doing its slow work beneath us. Water is finding its way. Mycorrhizal networks in forests exchange nourishment quietly beneath the surface, a modern discovery that feels almost mythic in itself. For centuries, people sensed that forests were connected in hidden ways. Now science has begun to describe some of those connections more clearly, though the feeling of wonder remains the same. The old stories and the new facts meet in this shared recognition that much of life happens out of sight. Ancient civilizations often understood this intuitively. The Egyptians built tombs that reflected a belief in hidden journeys after death. The Mesopotamians wrote epics that remembered flood and loss. The Greeks gave shape to the fragile line between human pride and divine reaction. The Norse, in their own severe and luminous way, placed catastrophe at the center of a meaningful cosmos. None of these traditions needed to be gentle in a modern sense to be wise. They were often stern, yet their sternness came from attention. They looked hard at mortality. They looked hard at change. They did not always ask for consolation first. They asked what is true. Perhaps this is why the myth of Ragnarok remains so resonant now. Modern life often tries to hide from endings, at least in its public language. We prefer continuity, progress, optimization, and uninterrupted growth. Yet everyone knows somewhere beneath the surface that nothing stays untouched forever. Bodies age, institutions weaken, technologies become obsolete, plans break, seasons end. Even the most carefully managed life is visited by uncertainty. A myth that says the world itself will one day face ruin may sound extreme, but it tells a truth people already know in smaller forms. What is loving, after all, except to recognize that what we cherish is finite? That recognition can make the world feel more vivid, not less. A sunset matters because it is passing. A child's voice matters because it will not sound that same way forever. A city matters because it is made of moments that will one day be history. The Norse myths, with their looming end, sharpen this tenderness. They teach an attention to impermanence that can be strangely peaceful when held gently. Not every beauty is fragile in a sad sense. Some beauty is fragile in the sense that it invites reverence. There is also something restful in the way old myths place individual lives inside a much larger cycle. A person is not the whole of history. A season is not the whole of time. A battle is not the whole of meaning. This can be humbling, but also relieving. One does not need to carry the entire world alone. The world has had its winters before. It has turned through darkness and back toward light more times than anyone can count. In such a view, the self becomes part of a continuing pattern, neither insignificant nor central to everything. Simply present, simply passing through. The Old Norse world was full of journeys, and journeys are another subtle form of change. Ships crossed dangerous water. Warriors, traders, and explorers left home to meet what was unknown. The Viking Age is often remembered in dramatic terms, but it was also an age of practical navigation, careful craft, and immense knowledge of sea and weather. Long before modern instruments, people read currents, stars, winds, and birds. They knew how to travel by listening. That skill feels almost meditative. To move through uncertainty by attention is a kind of wisdom that belongs both to seafarers and to sleepers. One watches, one waits, one allows the world to reveal itself gradually. In the same way, the Norse mythic cycle does not simply sprint toward destruction. It accumulates signs. Winter deepens, discord grows, bonds weaken. Fear and duty, love and rivalry, memory and consequence all gather. This gradual approach makes the ending more powerful, but it also makes the world feel inhabited. Nothing about it is accidental. Everything has a history. The end is already present in the beginning, though often in modest, nearly invisible forms. A crack in a wall, a rumor, a silence between allies, a forgotten oath, a misplaced trust. Tiny things can become cosmic in myth because myth understands reverberation. And reverberation is another lovely idea to hold lightly in the mind. A sound enters a hall and lingers. A word spoken by one person reaches another and changes a life. A gesture made long ago can still be felt centuries later. In the old sagas and poems, memory itself often behaves like a reverberation. The deeds of ancestors echo in descendants. Honor and shame pass through families. A name survives where a body does not. This, too, is a kind of immortality. Not a perfect one, but a human one. The dead continue in what is remembered, in what is repeated, in what is loved enough to be told again. Perhaps this is why so many cultures care so deeply about burial, ritual, and remembrance. They are ways of giving shape to disappearance. The ancient world knew this well. Tombs, mounds, monuments, and offerings all suggest that the living felt a responsibility toward the invisible. They did not imagine absence as simple emptiness. They made places for the dead in the landscape. The Norse world, with its mounds and grave goods and heroic memory, participates in this broader human effort to converse with loss. Ragnarok itself may be read, in part, as the ultimate shape of that conversation. Not denial of ending, but an insistence that even ending must be understood. There's an almost quiet courage in that insistence. To look at ruin without turning away is not a small thing. To imagine a future after ruin is also not a small thing. Together, they form a mature kind of wisdom. The myth does not promise that the old order will simply continue untouched. It does not offer the easy comfort of permanence, but it also refuses despair. It moves through devastation toward renewal, and that movement matters. Renewal after loss is not the same as innocence. It is deeper than innocence. It knows what was lost and still chooses to grow. As the listener drifts through these thoughts, it may be comforting to imagine how the old skalds might have handled such a tale. They would not have rushed it. A good story in the old style often had space around its words. Silence was part of the music. Names were spoken with care. Images were allowed to stand. The audience was trusted to feel the weight of a wolf, the cold of a sea, the brightness of a shield, the shadow of prophecy. In that way, storytelling itself becomes a gentle practice. It asks for attention, but not strain. It gives the mind something to follow while leaving room for rest. The written preservation of these stories is another quiet marvel. For centuries, the North changed, converted, and transformed under new religious and political currents. Yet fragments survived. Manuscripts were copied, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with practical intent, by people living in worlds already far from the age that first imagined the gods. Without them, much would be missing. With them, we have imperfect but precious windows into a vanished imaginative landscape. It is worth pausing over how fragile memory can be. A library fire, a damp room, a neglected manuscript, a broken chain of transmission, and a whole world can become nearly unreachable. The survival of myth is therefore not ordinary. It is fortunate. Fortune, however, is only part of the story. Human care matters too. Someone had to remember. Someone had to copy. Someone had to ask what these old verses meant and whether they should be kept. The preservation of myth is itself a human act of faith in continuity. Not unlike planting seeds for a future one may never see. Not unlike keeping a lamp burning in a window because one believes someone may be coming through the dark. The old stories reached us because people trusted that they were worth carrying. And they are worth carrying not because they are simple truths, but because they are complicated truths. Ragnarok contains violence and sorrow, but also continuity. It contains terror, but also beauty. It contains a final battle and then a renewed world. It is both the end of an age and a suggestion that endings are not the final word. That balance is part of its enduring power. It does not flatten experience into optimism or despair. It lets both stand. It says that catastrophe is real, and so is what follows. There is comfort, too, in the myth scale. It takes the anxiety that can hide in ordinary life and enlarges it until it becomes legible. The fear of things ending, the fear of loved ones lost, the fear of failing to hold what matters, the fear that the world itself may not remain stable, all of these are ancient fears. They are not solved by pretending they do not exist. They are eased by being seen in a larger pattern. When myth names them, they become less lonely. A person is no longer the only one to have felt the approach of winter. Winter, in any tradition, is often both literal and symbolic. It brings darkness, scarcity, and inwardness. It asks for patience. It can also reveal what is strong. Not everything survives winter, but what does survive often does so with a kind of quiet resilience. The Norse world knew this from the land itself. Animals adapt, people store, households prepare, communities rely on each other. A hard season becomes a test of practical wisdom. The mythic winter of Ragnarok seems to magnify that reality into universal form, as if saying that the whole cosmos must endure what every farmhouse already knows. And yet after winter comes a startling detail in the imagination: new green. There is something almost impossibly calm about that. Not triumph, not spectacle, but growth. A future made of grass, water, light, and the presence of those who remain. This image is gentle enough to rest upon. It does not demand applause, it simply appears. Life in this final form is modest. Modesty suits hope. Loud hope can feel brittle. Quiet hope is more durable. It is the kind that lives in kitchens, gardens, patient hands, repaired things, and the decision to begin again. Maybe that is why people continue to return to Ragnarok after all these centuries. It is not only because the story is dramatic, though it is. It is because it tells the truth in layers. It recognizes loss, the finitude of power, the fragility of order, the inevitability of change, and the possibility of renewal. Those are not separate lessons. They are facets of the same ancient wisdom. The world ends in one form or another many times, and still the world continues. This is true on the scale of empires, seasons, households, bodies, and dreams. So let the thought settle softly now. The gods have fallen. The fire has passed. The wolf has run its course through the old sky. Yet somewhere beyond the last smoke, a new brightness gathers with no hurry at all. The surviving world does not need to explain itself. It only needs to be there, breathing, waiting, quietly made. And you, listening from the safe side of night, need only follow that gentleness downward, where the story grows less distinct and more soothing, like a shore scene from far out at sea. The dark around you is not empty. It is full of old continuities. It holds the memory of forests, the slow turning of stars, the buried weight of stone, the patient movement of water underground. It holds all the things that continue when no one is naming them. It holds the unspoken life of the earth. In that darkness, the myth can rest beside the body's own need for stillness. The final battle is far away now, softened by time, softened by telling, softened by the simple act of being remembered kindly. And as sleep draws closer, it may be enough to imagine just one more small scene. Not a grand hall, not a warfield, not the burning end of all things, but a plain after rain. The air is cool, the grass is wet, a bird calls once and then is silent. The light is pale and even. Nothing dramatic occurs, and that is part of the piece. The world does not have to announce its survival. It only has to continue. So let the old tale drift lower, like ash settling into the ground that will one day make something grow. Let the names and flames and prophecies become softer, farther off, almost like the remnant of a dream. The story has done its work. It has carried us from beginning to end, and quietly, beyond the end. Now it can remain there in the dim and patient distance while the night closes gently around you. And while sleep, that oldest kind of surrender, comes with all its small, merciful worlds.